Trump Vance campaign in light of new remarks from the former president about the vice president's Jewish husband and newly uncovered remarks from his running mate, J.D. Vance, about childless Americans. Kristen Holmes joins me now. Kristen, Vance is on the campaign trail today. He's been going after the vice president, Harris. What has he been saying?
Well, Anderson, he's blaming her for everything, from inflation to immigration to crime. He said that she is responsible for the terrible affordability crisis in America, saying the price of gas, the price of groceries, that these are all things that Harris is behind. Now, I do want to remind you of one thing. Donald Trump and his team believe that Trump was strongest on 3 issues when it came to running against President Joe Biden. Those issues were immigration, crime, and inflation. You are going to continue to hear Trump's team hammer that Harris is part of the Biden administration, meaning Harris is part of those policies. They have seen the polling that shows that Donald Trump is stronger on those issues. They want to beat Harris the same way they were trying to beat President Joe Biden. The big question, of course, remains whether or not that is going to be possible. There's obviously a lot more enthusiasm around Kamala Harris than what we saw around President Joe Biden. Now, we have seen a very confident J.D. Vance out there today talking about Harris, hitting her hard, saying that it's time for Donald Trump to be back in office. But obviously, this is very different from what we heard in that Washington Post exclusive audio that they obtained from a donor event, in which J.D. Vance was much more skeptical, saying that it was a sucker punch when Joe Biden dropped out of the race, adding on top of that that there were more liabilities with Joe Biden than there were with Harris, and mentioning age specifically. So we know, obviously, there's a lot of still concern going into this new race.
And what else has Vance been talking about as campaign stops? I mean, does he reference this whole childless, cat lady thing, or just childless Democrats?
No, he hasn't talked about this at all, except for in interviews, particularly with Megyn Kelly, when he was trying to clean up these remarks and say it's about family. We also heard Donald Trump trying to defend J.D. Vance for these comments in an interview, saying that this was because J.D. Vance loves his family, he loves his children. And we are told, for all intents and purposes, right now that Donald Trump is sticking with J.D. Vance, that he has him on the ticket, and that he is not looking to replace him at this moment with anyone else, despite what you might be hearing from outside allies. But when it comes to what else J.D. Vance is saying on the campaign trail, it is almost singularly focused on Kamala Harris, because they are still in this race to define Kamala Harris. They want to paint her in a negative light because they just believe that voters don't know enough about her, but they're racing against both the clock and Harris herself as she's putting out ads to define herself.
Kristen Holmes, thanks very much. Perspective now from CNN political analyst and New York Times national political reporter Astrid Herndon, also CNN chief political correspondent Daniel Bash, former Atlanta mayor Keisha
Hey, what's up, Pumpkin?
now a Harris campaign senior advisor, and Republican strategist Shermichael Singleton. Daniel, you have Donald Trump on this radio program talking about the vice president's husband. The radio host brought it up. Trump is agreeing. Trump says any Jewish person would be a fool to vote for Democrats. Mm-hmm. Does that work?
He's certainly trying. He's trying very hard. And
that is a desperate attempt from Trump. Now it's going to get anti-Semitic. I told you, look, it's going to slowly creep out, slowly, day by day now, because now that Trump is scared and he knows what he's about to get from, confronting Kamala Harris, he's going to resort to even more desperate and obvious means, unfortunately. And so the anti-Semitism is going to come out. What's up, Shaka?
We'll tell you that the Harris campaign released a statement because he wasn't just talking about the idea that Democrats shouldn't vote for Kamala Harris, which he used to do about Joe Biden as well. He denigrated the second gentleman, as you played at the beginning of the show, along with, and clearly led by the host of that radio show. The Harris campaign said Donald Trump thinks he can score points with Jewish voters by denigrating them. He is wrong. And that really is kind of the key here.
By the way, Kamala Harris's husband was a Jewish and was out front leading the administration's efforts to combat anti-Semitism in America.
Correct. Which leads me to
it's an obvious anti-Semitic trope, and of course Trump is going to pretend like he had no idea. Like, what do you mean by that? And then if you mention World War II and all the Semetic material that was published, right, during the Nazi regime's period at reign, you know what I'm saying? Like, you would hear these things. You would know all the tropes if you know anything about it. But a lot of these people will even try to tell you that's not real, So, but the rest of us know it is real, and people do use those kind of tropes, just like people historically have used tropes towards Africans, African Americans, Black people in general. Yes. Well, we're not the only ones. Ours is old, but we're not the only ones that got some old tropes, thrown at us, centuries old,
An important point here, which is it is a historic trope, anti-Semitic trope, to suggest that
Thank you,
Jews
Pumpkin.
have to choose between their religion and the country in which they live.
Yeah, click the like button.
Suggestion being that they don't choose the country in which they live because their allegiance is to their religion and maybe even to Israel. Whether he knows that this is where he is, working and what he is talking about, unclear, but it has been pointed out in many, many forums that this kind of talk is based in millennia-long anti-Semitism.
Former President Donald Trump went on a WABC radio show in New York this morning, and he said this about Vice President Kamala Harris.
She dislikes Jewish people and Israel more than Biden did. If you are Jewish, regardless of Israel, if you you're Jewish, if you vote for a Democrat, you're a fool, an absolute fool.
Oh, sorry about that. I was on mute. Sorry about that.
They tell me that this Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, Mr. President, is Jewish. He's Jewish like Bernie Sanders is Jewish. Are you kidding me? He's a crappy Jew.
Yeah.
He's a horrible Jew. So on the way out,
Yeah, what I was going to say is that, Jewish people are not Israeli people. Israeli people are people that are citizens of Israel, right? And Jewish people are citizens of different countries around the world. All of them are not Israelis. You see what I'm saying? So one is like an ethnic group. The other is a nationality. And so it's the same with many other groups of people. And so when he says it, when Trump puts these things out there that way, like this, to try to make it seem like you're anti-Semitic because you don't support everything that Israel does all the time. They try to call that anti-Semitic, but then look what he's doing. He's being anti-Semitic at the same time himself. If not, it's even more obvious. Look.
And Israel more than Biden did. If you are Jewish, regardless of Israel, if you're Jewish, if you vote for a Democrat, you're a fool. An absolute fool.
and they tell me that this Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, Mr. President, is Jewish. He's Jewish like Bernie Sanders is Jewish. Are you kidding me? He's a crappy Jew.
Yeah.
He's a horrible Jew. So on the way out,
You heard there Trump saying, yeah, to that horrendous assertion by host Sid Rosenberg that second gentleman Doug Emhoff is a crappy Jew. Remember, when the second family moved into the vice president's residence, they became the very first to affix a mezuzah on any executive residence. Emhoff also helped launch the first official White House national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. His great-grandparents escaped persecution from what is now Poland around 120 years ago. But let's unpack all of the shocking things that President Trump said in that interview with Emily Tampkin, who is the author of a book called Bad Jews, A History of American Jewish Politics and Identities. Emily, you literally wrote the book on this. So what exactly is this thing of non-Jews or Jews calling people like Doug Emhoff bad Jews?
I think that it's important to remember that this has been going on for all of American Jewish history. And specifically, Trump has been saying versions of this for the last 5 years. You can go back to 2019 and find similar things that, if you were Jewish and you vote for a Democrat, you're disloyal. And basically, I think the function of it, look, every group tries to define who's in and who's out and what it means to be a minority in a larger country. But this move specifically is about using political differences to define the identity, to define the borders of the identity, and to say that those who do not agree with you aren't Jewish at all, which means that you don't have to try to convince them, you don't have to prove that you're right, you don't have to win the argument, you can just cancel them off, and thus yours is the more legitimate Jewish position. And that's what Trump has done over and over again for the last 5 years, and that's certainly what he did in this interview.
We should note that Jews, according to exit polls, vote Democratic 60 to 70% of the time, depending on the election. So when Trump repeatedly says that Jewish people who vote Democratic or vote for Biden should, quote, have their...
The Jewish people in the U.S., 70% are Democrats. So what the hell is Donald Trump talking about? There's nothing that comes out of his mouth that he's not this kind of stuff. This is either poorly contrived rhetoric from Trump, and whether he thought about it in advance or not, it's still poorly contrived.
Examined, which is now he's saying about for Kamala Harris. He's saying that most Jews should have their heads examined. What does this reveal to you about Donald Trump?
I think this is the question to ask, because actually it's not really about Doug Emhoff, and it's not about Kamala Harris or Bernie Sanders or Chuck Schumer or me or you. This is about Donald Trump, who has taken, there's the old dual loyalty trope, which, as you know, says that Jews can never really be first and foremost loyal to America because we're loyal to Judaism and our co-religionists and Zionists and Israel. Trump has taken that and sort of tweaked it to say that Jews, to be good American Jews, we need to be supportive of Israel and loyal to Israel, but specifically supportive of Israel in a way that Trump believes in. And specifically, even more specifically, we need to do that by supporting Donald Trump, which is to say that Trump is saying that our worth as patriots, as American citizens, as Jews, is contingent on support for a partisan political figure. And I think that I would hope that every American Jew is very uncomfortable with that, but certainly the 60 to 70% of Jews who vote for Democrats should find that offensive.
Yeah, when you say
Exactly. Everybody should find that offensive, because it's the same thing if somebody says, look at this. They actually, now that I hear about it, this language, you've heard people say this about black folks too. The same things,
say partisan needs to be a partisan loyalty. You're referring to both loyalty to Donald Trump and loyalty to Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, and his view of what's best for Israel, which we should note 70% of the Israeli public disagrees with. So that kind of begs the question of, is 70% of Israel disloyal to Israel because they don't support Netanyahu? I mean, you start going down this line, it's wild. Obviously, President Trump has done a lot of things that Israelis are happy about.
That's what I was saying the other day when they had the rally, and I guess Netanyahu was speaking in the Capitol, and you saw the way he was talking about the protesters, right? If you go and watch that, go back, I forget what clip that was, but it's called Netanyahu Comes to the Capitol or something like that, right? But in the video, we're talking about how he talks about the protesters and how Trump talks about protesters and how, how would they treat the protesters in the U.S.? You see? And I was making a correlation saying the way they sound, I wouldn't be surprised, because even if you don't agree with what the protesters say, you should never degrade them necessarily. Don't degrade them. They're still protesters, and maybe there's some things they got right. Maybe there's some things they got wrong, but you don't ever want to make it seem like you're willing to send the military on the police. And those are things that Trump has said. Those are things that Netanyahu has done himself, you see, giving orders like that. So when we support dictators or when we support democratic leaders, whichever one, what comes into question is how do they treat their own citizens? And is their view of us, U.S. citizens, is it the same? Is it better? Because I would like to think that he would have respect for American citizens. I would like to think that since he's getting our tax dollars, like I'm talking about all of ours, respect for all of it. And like he said, 70% of U.S. Jews are in the Democratic Party anyway, supporters of the Democratic Party, Jewish people.
Recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which was promised by president after president, but Donald Trump actually did it. He officially moved the U.S. Embassy there. He seems to have repaired his relationship with Netanyahu. How do you square those actions relating to Israel with these comments about Jews in America?
I think that it's important to note that, or it's important to stress that if Donald Trump wanted to go out and make the argument that actually all of that means that he's the better president for Israel and for American Jews, he's well within his rights to do that. But he's going a step further and canceling out those Jews who disagree with him, undercutting those Jews who disagree with him, because to actually have the argument, he would also have to address that he dined with a white supremacist and Holocaust denier, and that he's regularly pushed conspiracy theories about George Soros, and that just the other day he promised Christian Americans that they only have to vote this one last time and then everything will be fixed, and so they won't have to vote again. You know, he would have to sort of go through his record on all of this.
She is breaking it down. Dude is a complete and total hypocrite. He should have never even opened his mouth up about Jewish people in the U.S. You know, that's what's crazy about it, because when you go over his record, he is saying crazy shit.
For American Jews, he's well within his rights to do that. But he's going a step further and canceling out those Jews who disagree with him, undercutting those Jews who disagree with him, because to actually have the argument, he would also have to address that he dined with a white supremacist and Holocaust denier, and that he's regularly pushed conspiracy theories about George Soros, and that just the other day he promised Christian Americans that they only have to vote this one last time and then everything will be fixed, and so they won't have to vote again. You know, he would have to sort of go through his record on all of this, to say nothing of all the other ways in which he's arguably undermining the pluralism and liberalism that keeps American Jews safe here. So I think there's a reason that most Jews aren't planning on voting for Donald Trump. And there's a reason that Trump himself doesn't want to have these conversations. It's because, as you say, being supportive of this one particular vision and version of Israel is not necessarily the most important thing to most American Jews. And I also want to say, it does not cancel out or excuse any of the other things that I just listed that I would argue are very clearly anti-Semitic.
Emily Tankin.
That's when I smack the shit out you. I smack the shit out. That's when.
It seems pretty obvious that we're going to be saying Vice President Kamala Harris's name a lot. Let's talk about pronouncing it correctly and why former President Donald Trump refuses to. Here he was just this past Friday at a campaign rally in Florida.
They were explaining to me, you can say Kamala, you can say Kamala. I said, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter what I say. I couldn't care less if I...
You're going to hear the worst things. It's going to get worse than this. I promise you, it's going to get worse than this.
Mispronounce it or not, I couldn't care less.
For someone who says he doesn't care, Trump sure seems to care, at least about the fact that he's now facing Harris instead of President Joe Biden in this election. We've all mispronounced a name. This is obviously not that. Trump has a history of purposely mispronouncing names, specifically of people who aren't white, or emphasizing traditionally non-white names as a racist dog whistle. For instance, the biggest perpetrator of the birther conspiracy theory is also the longtime president of the Barack Obama middle name fan club.
Barack H. Obama. Barack Hussein Obama. Barack Hussein Obama. Barack Hussein Obama. By Barack Hussein Obama. Barack Hussein.
Remember that?
During the Republican primaries, he called former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who goes by her middle name, Nikki, Nimrata, which is a bastardization of her birth name, Nimrata. He also called her Nimbra. In fact, Trump and those who support him have such a track record of doing this kind of thing that it was actually a comedy bit at the 2020 Democratic National Convention.
I cannot wait to see her debate our current Vice President, Mika Pence. Or is it Paints?
It's pronounced Ponce, I believe.
Oh, some kind of weird foreign name?
Yeah, not very American sounding.
Yeah, that's what people are saying. Strongly.
But as Trump appeals to voters who do think it's funny that he says Kamala instead of Kamala, could trying to diminish his opponent simply because she isn't white alienate the voters who don't think it's funny? Might it backfire? It wouldn't be the first time that his name game has.
You know what was interesting? Joe Biden won against Barack Hussein Obama. Has anyone ever heard of him?
We've heard of him, but Biden won against Trump, not Obama. Trump dismissed his repeated allusion to the Biden-Obama matchup that never was as sarcasm, bristling at suggestions by critics that the slip-ups were a sign he's showing his age. Which makes you think, what if the shoe were on the other foot? And the emphasis on his other syllable, Don Old. Would he like it? Maybe, as he says, he wouldn't worry about it. Maybe it wouldn't matter to him. Maybe he couldn't care less. Doubtful.
Breaking news, these are live pictures out of Reno, Nevada. That is where Senator J.D. Vance is about to take the stage at any moment. He continues on the campaign trail to be on the defense over his, quote, childless cat lady comments, which question people who do not have children. Tonight, our K-File is reporting that those comments are part of a pattern of derogatory remarks about Americans who do not have children. In fact, Vance has even fundraised off of these comments. K-File finding that in November in 2020, Vance says childless Americans were, quote, more sociopathic than those with children. Vance also saying that in his experience, the, quote, most deranged and, quote, most psychotic people he sees on social media are typically childless. Out front now is K-File's Andrew Kaczynski. Okay, I'm sure that one could probably look at the sociopathic thing and be very clear on an answer on that. I mean, it's sort of amazing that he's weighing in on this. What more did you find on all of these comments?
Yeah, so this wasn't a one-off comment from Vance. He had a pattern of making these comments both in his Senate run and even in the years before. And I think the thing that's important for people to remember is when he made these comments, this wasn't like a gaffe, Aaron. These are comments that he was proud of. He fundraised off of them. And I want to read a couple of those fundraising emails because he went even a little further than what he said in those cat lady comments. Look at this one from August 2021 where he said, quote, we need to speak directly to patriots like you about the serious issue of radical childless leaders in this country. We've allowed ourselves to be dominated by childless sociopaths. They're invested in all caps nothing because they're not invested in the country's children. And he actually also sent another email that read, quote, our country is basically run by childless Democrats who are miserable in their own lives and want to make the rest of the country miserable too.
He spends all his time talking about what he doesn't like.
What I want to know is why have we turned our country over to people who don't have a direct stake in it?
I mean, it's black and white, right? And it was black and white. It was actually in a fundraising email, which is pretty stunning. So that shows, and by the way, it's not that anyone thought there was any misspeak because he's doubled down and owned it, but he meant what he said. He fundraised off it. But then he also had a podcast, right? And he talked about it there?
That's right. Well, he went on a podcast when they were promoting, people probably remember the Hillbilly Elegy was made into a movie around November, December in 2020, and he went on a podcast to promote it. And listen to these comments that he made on that podcast.
There's just these basic cadences of life that I think are really powerful and really, really valuable when you have kids in your life. And the fact that so many people, especially in America's leadership class, just don't have that in their lives, you know, I worry that it makes people more sociopathic and ultimately...
This dude just said, this is weird. This is weird for him to even make a statement like this based on the things he's claiming. It's ridiculous how he just came out with this comment.
Our whole country a little bit less less mentally stable. And of course, you talk about going on Twitter. Final point I'll make is you go on Twitter and almost always the people who are most deranged and most psychotic are people who don't have kids at home.
And what's interesting, Aaron, about those comments, as he's sort of defended them, or people have defended him by saying he was just taking aim at Democratic leaders. But those comments on that podcast.
He just said that if you don't have kids, you're a sociopath. That's basically what he's saying.
Podcasts were clearly a little bit more broad and were sort of targeting all childless people.
They certainly were, calling them sociopathic, less mentally stable. So what's the response from the Vance campaign to this?
So we reached out to the Vance campaign. We asked them, are you squaring these comments, the controversy around it? And I'll read you what they told us. They told us in a statement, Senator Vance has clearly stated that he was talking about politicians on the left who support policies that are explicitly anti-child and anti-family. The media can obsess over it all they want, but he's not going to back down when it comes to advocating for policies that protect parental rights and encourage people to have more kids.
All right, Andrew, thank you. And you're staying with us. Eric, okay, let me just ask you this in your capacity as someone who's supporting Trump, and someone's childless or having children status should not be relevant to these conversations.
Agreed.
Does Vance, what do you think about this? Is Vance a problem for this ticket?
Well, look, I'm from the Reagan wing of the party. I'm a big believer in robust foreign policies, and J.D. Vance is an isolationist. He's a populist. I'm not. He would not have been my choice. Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Bill Haggerty, Tom Cotton. There's a whole list that I would have picked before Mr. Vance, Senator Vance. But I think the reality is it's all about the president. The vice president never really matters. Last time it mattered was LBJ. He helped carry Texas for JFK. I think that'll be the case here. J.D. Vance will have a very specific role in some of the, Wisconsin, some of the swing states.
Well, Ohio wasn't really, at least before him, was not in question.
Well, and in fact, in Ohio, DeWine won by 23 points in 22, and Vance won by 6.
But this is true. I've said it myself that the VP doesn't matter, except for the fact that you have seen Donald Trump have to defend his statements over and over. And if there's one place that Donald Trump does not like to be, is where the spotlight is on a problematic running mate.
Who do you think is going to be her vice presidential pick? Let me know what you think. I'm interested. I think it's going to be that, what's his name? I think Shapiro is his name. I think it's going to be him, but I'm not sure. But let me know if you've thought about that.
And not maybe the comments that he himself is making. He likes to have the attention on the stuff that he wants to keep the attention on. And instead, he's having to defend J.D. Vance's comments.
Well, I agree with that. But also, let's remember, Kamala Harris called Joe Biden a racist during the very first debate they had just before she got no votes. And then, of course, she has said publicly that she thinks America is a systemically racist country. I reject that. I don't agree with it at all.
J.D. Vance wrote that he hated police, cops and emails. I mean, we can play this all day.
Exactly, that's my point. So, but we're wanting to focus on J.D. Vance as if he's the only person in the world that says nutty things. Kamala Harris, who's running for president, has said some pretty outrageous things.
But I will say, Ashley, one thing we know about Donald Trump is that Donald Trump likes to have people talk about Donald Trump.
Agreed.
Okay, and on that ticket, nobody's talking about Donald Trump. He did a whole interview last night, and everyone's still talking about J.D. Vance and the.
For anybody to argue that there's not systemic racism in the U.S. is crazy, first of all, because if there wasn't systemic racism, then why are there always these unarmed black men getting shot by the police? It's ridiculous. It's obviously systemic. Every problem that you have, to some degree, if the system does not work to resolve that problem, to stop that problem, to resolve that problem, if the system doesn't do it, then it's a systemic failure. So what else do you want to call it? It's better than saying it's a racist country. So it's
latest revelations about J.D. Vance.
Well,
no, you're absolutely.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The one thing you ask of your vice president is to do no harm, and J.D. Vance is doing nothing but harming not just himself, but harming this ticket. CNN had a poll coming out of the convention that he was at a negative 6%, net negative 6% favorability. I was turned on Fox News last night, which I hardly ever do, and there was segment after segment after segment about J.D. Vance and these his cat lady comments. You know, so the reality is that, you know, he's doing nothing but harm, and Democrats will continue to characterize him and frame him up as a MAGA mini-me to Donald Trump, as someone who's double downing on their contempt and disdain for women. This is the year of women. You could see right now in internal polls from the Harris campaign that she's up among women by 21 points on Donald Trump. And that's a problem for them. There's now whispers within the Republican Party about getting rid of J.D. Vance because he's actually having the opposite effect that they want and they desire. And then let me just add this too. What I found very interesting is now it's only working to Kamala Harris's advantage. There's a organizing group on Facebook that's called Cat Ladies for Kamala Harris. So this is all, you know, the Democrats are just sitting back, you know, watching this thing, sipping the tea as it sort of unravels for the Republicans with J.D. Vance. It's been a complete and total disaster.
All right, so there's been a lot of talk about that, and I it's talk at this point.
And you know
the
what?
ticket, no evidence.
It's misogynistic. You know, it's misogynistic at its core because, you know, all right, so let's say that now these women do have children. Are you going to respect them? Right? No, the answer is no, they won't, because then they would be like, well, is she married to a man? And then if she's not married, if she's divorced, would they respect her? If she took care of her bills, took care of her kids, had children by more than one man, but wasn't married, would they respect her? You see, so the truth is that they don't respect women regardless of what they do. That's the whole point in it right there, you know?
And so Trump's thinking of that. But Harry, if he looks at the numbers, what does he see?
I mean, it's the worst vice presidential pick of my lifetime. And, you know, if we look at the net favorability ratings, you know, we did this segment last week, which basically said he was the first one that had a net negative favorability rating coming out of his party's convention. Damn. And what we see is, according to the ABC News Ipsos poll, it's only gotten worse. It's only gotten worse. It's gone from negative 6 points to now negative 15 points.
Look at this.
Mark my words. This is.
Look at what? What? Before July 20th, 6 points, minus 6 points. July, 2 weeks later, no, 1 week later, 15 points, minus 15 points.
The worst vice presidential pick probably since 1972 when George McGovern chose Thomas Eagleton as his VP.
1972.
He got replaced. I don't think Vance is going to get replaced, but that's what we're talking about here.
Hey guys,
in no planet did I ever think we'd be talking about VP nominees this late into the cycle after it was picked like 10 days ago.
Bakari?
But check this out, y'all. If he doesn't run for VP, guess what he can do for a living?
You could shut the fuck up.
No, I think that J.D. Vance is kind of the Sarah Palin of Dan Quayle's. And so that's what you're seeing right now. You're just seeing somebody who's flailing and attempting to find his footing and is having a great deal of difficulty due to their lack of experience. One of the other things that's kind of throwing this whole game off is that the Republicans have had a great deal of time to deal with the concern of whether or not Joe Biden was going to be replaced on the ticket. And still yet, they have not been able to formulate a game plan. I mean, just the utter fact that people can't pronounce her name correctly. And there are a lot of people who are watching who her name is Kamala, right? It's quite simple. But there are a lot of people who are watching tonight. Every time her name is mispronounced, it's a shriek. It's a shriek in your ear because there are a lot of people who are of mixed race or have a funny name or who are foreign or whatever it may be, who have a different name, who hear that, who are wondering why that is such a tagline. And so Republicans are throwing everything against the wall. They're using the race card.
And you know something? It's not working for them. That's a very good observation that he brought up. It's like, you know, there's a lot of nuances in there when you're dealing with the public in the U.S. The U.S. is one of the most diverse it's the most diverse Western country, period. You see, maybe can the UK compete with the diversity? I wonder. Let's look at the data. But the U.S. is pretty much one of the oldest immigrant nations. And so it has a lot of diversity for the last, few hundred years. You see what I mean? like easily 400 years. It's very diverse. So on that note, great observation, bro.
You hear her called a DEI hire. You hear all of these different things, and nothing is sticking right now because she has found her stride. And that fundamentally is one of the.
When you throw too much at the board and it doesn't stick in the beginning, at some point you should just stop before you get exposed, basically.
Problems that Republicans are having.
More now on the Trump Vance campaign in light of new remarks from the former president about the vice president's Jewish husband.
Trump has constantly said that Vice President Kamala Harris is anti-Semitic. And keep in mind, she is married to a Jewish man. But during an interview today, the rhetoric took another dark turn. Just listen to this.
Because she dislikes Jewish people and Israel more than Biden did. And Biden never did anything, and neither did Obama. If you're Jewish, if you vote for a Democrat, you're a fool, an absolute fool. And today it's almost like, Schumer has become a Palestinian. Chuck Schumer is officially now a Palestinian.
It's funny, but it's true. It's sad. He is. And they tell me that this Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, Mr. President, is Jewish. He's Jewish like Bernie Sanders is Jewish. Are you kidding me? He's a crappy Jew.
Yeah.
He's a horrible Jew.
Joining us at the table is CNN commentator and Washington Post opinion columnist Catherine Rampell. Catherine, I've given up trying to understand why Trump keeps going there with this argument, but then to say that Doug Emhoff is not, or to agree with the idea that Doug Emhoff is not a good Jew is beyond.
As the resident crappy Jew at this table, I would like to say that Doug Emhoff should wear this as a badge of honor, to be called a...
Golf, that's exactly right. People asked, when they had Biden, people asked for something new, someone younger. And look at what they got. So don't complain.
Bad Jew by
Donald
Trump. Like,
they
what
got something.
higher,
They got what they wanted.
praise could there be? Spinoza was considered a bad Jew. Like, Einstein was considered a bad Jew. That's pretty good company to be in. However vile those.
Damn, did you hear that? You hear that response? Whoa, she said Einstein was called a bad Jew. It's true. And at the height of anti-Semitism, all the good folks were the bad ones. It's crazy.
Was considered a bad Jew. Like, Einstein was considered a bad Jew.
Doug Emhoff is not, or to agree with the idea that Doug Emhoff is not a good Jew is beyond.
As the resident crappy Jew at this table, I would like to say that Doug Emhoff should wear this as a badge of honor, to be called a bad Jew by Donald Trump. Like, what higher praise could there be? Spinoza was considered a bad Jew. Like, Einstein was considered a bad Jew. That's pretty good company to be in. However vile those comments may be. Wear it as a badge of honor.
Trump wants to make the case, I guess, that Democrats are anti-Semitic, but how on earth can you do that when you're disparaging Jewish people in the process?
That's an excellent question. How the hell could he's out of his mind?
Pretty easily. There's a huge amount of Democrats who are siding against Israel in this conflict in the Middle East, and the Biden and Harris administration, particularly now with Harris in the lead, I think are putting way more pressure and blame on Israel than they ought to be. And look, this is a political argument he's making, that if you want a president that's going to stand with Israel, our ally, and not treat them terribly in the middle of this war and all the things they've got going on, then pick the Republicans
What
this
does
time.
Doug Emhoff have to do with anything? Really?
I don't know. I don't care.
Nothing.
I don't care about Doug. I care about her positions on these issues.
Good point.
I would also say I care about Donald Trump's record of anti-Semitic comments, which seems sort of relevant, beyond what was said.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever happened to the idea that in politics, that the John McCain moment, when you are able to say, "Hey, hold on, that goes a little bit too far." It's the spouse.
We've moved so far beyond John McCain moment from that space.
That is true.
Listen, maybe that moment will find itself in 50 years from now, but we're at the moment of just combat. And Trump has always done, President Trump has always, whether it's a good job or a bad job, he's always done, a way of just highlighting a particular issue that creates, sort of chaos and scandal and creates everybody getting worked up about it. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about the issue like Josh is talking, like we're talking about here. At the end of the day, it falls to, if you believe in Israel, if you believe in the right to defend itself, you've got a party who's working against you, and you've got a party who's working for you. And that seems foolish, similar to the Latino community when he said to them, listen, how are you guys supporting illegal immigrations? Illegal immigration is literally taking jobs away from you. That woke up a lot of Latinos in California and Arizona and Nevada. So he's making an argument we may not like as articulate, but he's making an argument that's connecting with people.
There's a bit of a bigger cultural discussion here, though. There is a huge problem of anti-Semitism in this country. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. It exists on the far left and it exists on the far right. Donald Trump dined with an avowed neo-Nazi. What we've seen in some of these protests that's espousing vile anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist rhetoric is scary. And for millions of American Jews, it's a scary time to be a Jew. So even leaning into rhetoric like that, rather than saying, this is not a candidate who supports Israel, or they're not fierce enough in Israel's right to defend itself, that is legitimate. Agreeing someone's a bad Jew or saying you are not a good Jew if you don't vote this way, that is adding to a very, very ugly problem.
I will say that when you're at a rhetorical point, when we're dividing people into good Jews and bad Jews, that's rarely good for the Jews.
That's never ended well.
Yeah, never ended well.
Before the break, we were talking, Nina, about the possibility that one of the people on the ticket on the Democratic side could be a Jew.
Yes, that is true.
I mean, that's possible. Likely,
I campaigned with twice a Jewish candidate.
It's very likely.
By the name of Bernard Sanders, senator from Vermont. And I watched my senator be called a self-hating Jew. His family perished in the Holocaust. His father made it out and some others, but a lot of his family perished in the Holocaust. So just even listening to that entire conversation has me enraged. To use Palestinians as a racial slur. Palestinians matter just like Israelis matter. Both people are entitled to live a good life, and we got to find a way to make that happen. But for President Donald J. Trump to continue to sable rattle in that way, what has the Biden-Harris administration done that has been against Israel?
And that's the thing about it. Trump, he's been able to divide, Palestinian Americans and, also try to divide other Americans like Jewish people, make it one group against another group, always have the conversation be focused on that. When in reality, most Americans want there to be an end to the situation. And most Americans respect the fact that Palestinians have a right to their freedoms and Israelis, and both have a right to peace. Everybody understands that. But the problem is that Donald Trump runs and tries to divide. He doesn't try to unify people around a resolution for peace. For him, as far as he cares, Israel should just go to destroying any other Palestinian, as far as Trump is concerned. And that's the sad thing about it. So what do you expect Americans to do if that puts us in a tough situation, because the only thing we can do is vote. We vote. What do we want? We want an end to the situation. So that means we need diplomats that can help bring it to the end, bring a diplomatic solution to the end. That's what we need. Diplomats. Force, weapons is not going to do it. You won't be able to bomb anybody into submission. You're only creating more enemies that way, essentially, no matter what you call it. Even if you call it defending yourself, at this ratio, after months, people begin to see it differently, you see. So in any case, let's hear more.
If not, it is our bombs that are bombing Palestinian babies over there in the Gazas. And as many Democrats have said, the cries of a Palestinian baby and the cries of an Israeli baby sounds the same. And so I'm just troubled, even just around this table, that just the total disregard for Palestinian lives, and then to intimate that the Biden-Harris administration has not done anything. They have funded time and time again. 40,000 Palestinians have been killed.
I don't think anyone disregarded Palestinian lives. I'm an Arab American.
But I wonder, how much do you think that will ultimately matter for Kamala Harris?
I mean, I think the vice president, so far she has shown herself to want to continue what the administration that she is part of wants to do. Now, she has softened some of the, she has said, in other words, she is troubled about the suffering of Palestinians. But saying something and doing something about it is two different things. We, as the United States of America, as any other nation, should want both peoples to be able to have freedom, justice, and security, because that brings freedom, justice, and security for everybody in that region.
I totally agree, but the problem is identifying who is the cause of the instability, of the war, of the violence. And there is only one cause. It's Hamas. And I do believe there are a number of people on the left in this country who are not.
Well, even if it is, it doesn't even matter. The point is whether it's Hamas, whether it's Iran, whether it's anybody else, Hezbollah. The point is what is the diplomatic approach to peace with any of them? Because ultimately, the U.S. doesn't really want to be there, right? And these conflicts bring basically the U.S. there, right? It's just a never-ending cycle. So we need diplomats that can talk with all of them and come to some resolution. Or it is going to be even more war. That's the problem. The way it's being handled now is basically creating more war. It's a if people don't tone down the rhetoric and move towards a real agreement, it's going to be something bad that's going to happen there, like even far worse.
Not rooting for Israel on this thing. They've got it in their mind that Israel is somehow the aggressor or the cause of this. It was Hamas who took the...
And see, that's another thing. In finding a solution, who gives a damn who started it? They will never get to the end of this. They will always be like, yeah, but then the one before us and then the one before us. Yeah, but on the other side, they had somebody that did this. It's like, come on. We all know this is a... Do you know how many decades this has been? Can there be any doubt? Why would you need to go back decades to be like, who started it? Look at where it's at now and just learn from what has been done and do something significant towards the future to make sure nobody has a reason to do anything like that again. Like this is like geopolitical shit interest. It's like there's real money. People are dying over money. It really comes down to money. They don't want to say that they're fighting about money, but this is about money, agreements in the region, Israel, Saudi Arabia. It's a few other countries. They're part of some trade deal, part of a security deal. You see what I mean? So this conflict has just found a way to the Palestinian-Israel conflict. It's almost a sub-conflict of another bigger conflict. You see? The bigger story, the bigger picture, and it's just had this outcome. It's all exploded with Israel and Palestine, but it could have been anywhere. It could be in a lot of places.
The kidnappings, it was Hamas who did the raping, it was Hamas who did the murdering, and Israel has to be able to defend itself, and the Palestinian people will be better off when Hamas is gone.
Every nation has a right to defend itself. So we're not saying anything new on that, Scott. This is my point here on this. We have to humanize Palestinians just as
Yo, Golf, excellent point. Absolutely, excellent point. Yeah, for real. Opposition to BB's nationalism is not anti-Semitic. It has nothing to do with their faith. There are hundreds of thousands of Jewish people in Israel also protesting. Exactly. Facts.
Somebody that believes that Israel has a right
Hey, Andrea.
to exist. I believe Palestinians have a right to exist. Like, I'm not picking and choosing here. I think all of those lives in that region matter. But you have some people who disregard, just like that conversation we just listened to. They use Palestinian as a racial slur. And that is wrong. As you dehumanize people, you make it easier for them to be just killed. You want to keep going back to October 7th, and let's talk about the 40,000 Palestinians who have been killed and the millions who are living in famine right now.
Every single Palestinian.
You want to blame all that on is it Hamas's fault that this is still going on?
100%. Yes, 100%.
And just, I think you make a valid point on using Palestinian as sort of a slur or to otherize. I think that the broader point here is this conflict could be over tomorrow if Hamas agreed to a ceasefire.
The conflict could be over tomorrow.
That doesn't mean that there won't be decades.
Netanyahu would agree.
Well, there
He-
you have to
what?
release
He has
hostages.
been on, he has
agree
been
to
on
what?
record. Look, there were people whose family members were hostages in D.C.
I believe they had an agreement that Biden issued to Benjamin, right? Netanyahu. And that was just like maybe over a week ago. It's new. And as far as I know, that was when it was going on when he was speaking in the Capitol. And even at that point, he had not agreed to the terms issued by the U.S. president. So, I mean, and now they're like days after acting like they don't know what the agreement is. That's suspect, yo.
At the protest.
And by the way, there's plenty of Israelis who don't support Netanyahu, but if the hostages were
from a
released,
political perspective, I really do wonder how this is going to play out, because I think one of the things we're hearing from Trump in that clip is frustration that the politics of this issue has not swung his way. And it has not.
I think let's look at this conversation, what Nina is saying and sort of the friction within the Democratic Party. I think it's absolutely moving this way. Trump's going to amplify it, and we'll hear it more and more, and it'll start to shift.
I guess what I'm saying is I don't see any evidence. Trump is frustrated that he hasn't seen American Jews swing to his side of the ledger, swing to the Republican Party. We really have not seen that.
Because Jews tend, again, resident crappy Jew. I don't know that I speak for all of my people, but I can speak for some of us. The reason why Jews tend to be left of center is because one of the core values of Judaism is something called tikkun olam. It's about repairing the world. It's about social justice. It's about making the world a better place. People can interpret that different ways, obviously. That's not necessarily politically aligned with one party or another, but it is not aligned with Trump. Trump wants to burn everything down. Trump wants to belittle everyone. I hear Scott talking about how Trump would be a greater friend to Israel. It's not clear to me how,
By not blaming Israel for the obvious
Biden-
mayhem that has been done.
Biden has been a good friend to Israel.
Biden has not done that, Scott. You know that.
The Democratic Party has huge elements that believe Netanyahu is at fault and not Hamas.
There are millions of Democrats in this country.
There are
Joe Biden
Israelis.
and his
There are
administration
a lot of them
Israelis
hate
who hate
Israel.
Netanyahu. Most Israelis don't like Netanyahu. So the idea that somebody's critical of Netanyahu does not mean that they're not a friend to Israel, because Israelis themselves.
By the way,
are critical
Donald
of
Trump
Netanyahu.
himself, critical of Netanyahu.
Oh yeah,
They really glossed over
reasons.
that, it seems like. But by the way, this speaks to a broader thing. I think Donald Trump, who was a novice when he came into politics, tends to look at voting blocks and people and demographics as these monoliths. And he's always struggled to understand, why couldn't you be with me if you're this? So you're Jewish, you must only care about Israel, therefore you are with me, and if you're not,
You
you're a
might
bad
call
Jew.
it identity politics.